She wore his mother's insult like a second skin for 3 days before she decided she was done being quiet about it. Nadia Mensah had come to Seoul for architecture. She had a fellowship, a studio apartment in Mapo district that smelled like fresh paint and possibility, and a 5-year plan that had no column for a Korean Mafia boss who looked at her across a rooftop party in Itaewon like she was the first thing he'd seen clearly in years. She had not planned for Shin Hyun-woo. Nobody planned for Hyun-woo. That was the thing she would understand later, that every person in his orbit had arrived there by accident and stayed by choice, drawn by something he didn't perform and couldn't explain. He was 34, lean and controlled, with a sharp jaw and narrow dark eyes that moved through a room the way a man moves through territory he owns because he does. He ran the Shin network, construction, logistics, and the shadow economy underneath both, with the quiet authority of someone who had inherited power young and spent every year since deciding what kind of man to be inside it. He was not, by any reasonable measure, Nadia's problem. He became her problem on a Tuesday. She was sketching the roofline of a Hanok restoration in Buckshin when his car stopped at the wrong address, and he got out and looked up at the building she was drawing and said, in English that carried no accent, "You've got the bracket angle wrong. The original would have been steeper." She looked up from her sketchbook. "Excuse me, the bracket." He pointed. "Joseon period, that district. The pitch would have been at least 10 degrees steeper. Your drawing has it at maybe 6. She looked at the building, looked at her drawing, looked at him. He was right. She hated that immediately. "I was going to correct it," she said. "Of course," he said, and something moved at the corner of his mouth. Not quite a smile, not quite amusement, something that lived in the narrow, infuriating territory between them, and he got back in his car and left. She corrected the bracket angle. She thought about it for 3 days. On the 4th day, he was at the same coffee shop she'd started going to in Angukdong, sitting alone at a corner table with a construction report and an untouched Americano, and he looked up when she walked in with the expression of a man who was not surprised and had decided not to pretend otherwise. She sat down across from him without being invited. He looked at her. She looked at him. "Nadia Mensah," she said. "I'm an architectural fellow from Accra. I'm here for 18 months. I correct my own bracket angles." "Shin Hyun-woo," he said. "I know who you are. And I know you correct your own angles. I was testing whether you'd admit you'd missed it. That's an insufferable thing to do to a stranger." "Yes," he said simply. "Do you want coffee?" She wanted to say no. She said yes. She stayed for 2 hours. They talked about the restoration project, about Joseon architecture versus colonial interruption, about what cities owe their own history and what they owe their future. He was precise and unexpectedly curious, and he listened the way almost nobody listened, completely without preparing his next point while she was still making hers. She walked home through Angukdong in the thin October cold and told herself it was just coffee. It was not just coffee. The next 3 weeks moved in the way significant things move, slowly from the inside, unstoppably in retrospect. Coffee became dinner, became long walks through districts he knew in the granular way of a man who had funded half their renovation. He showed her Seoul the way a city shows itself only to people who have loved it long enough to know where it hides. She showed him her sketchbooks, all of them, which she had never done with anyone, and he turned the pages with a careful attention that felt, inexplicably, like being read accurately for the first time. She did not ask too much about the Shin network. She was not naive. Itaewon had told her enough, and the way rooms rearranged themselves around him told her the rest. She asked one direct question on the 4th week, over dinner in a restaurant where the staff knew his name and didn't bring menus. "The construction business," she said. "All of it." He looked at her. "No," he said. "Not all of it. Is anyone getting hurt? Not by me. Not directly. Is that a meaningful distinction? I've spent 10 years trying to make it one," he said. It was the most honest thing she'd heard anyone say in a long time, and she recognized it as such and filed it away in the part of her that was already in more trouble than she was admitting. She called her mother in Accra that night. Her mother, Nadia Mensah, was 61 years old, a retired professor of African literature, a woman of magnificent opinions held with total conviction, and the person Nadia trusted more than anyone alive. "Tell me about Seoul," her mother said. "It's extraordinary. Nadia said. The architecture is... There's this conversation between old and new that I've never seen handled quite like. Nadia. Yes. Tell me about the man. Silence. There isn't. Nadia Mensah. She told her, carefully minimizing the way you minimize things to someone who will see straight through the minimizing, but you do it anyway out of instinct. Korean. Older. Complicated business. Very well. Listens properly. Her mother was quiet for a long moment. What kind of complicated business? She said. The kind that's complicated. Another silence. Longer. Come home for Christmas, her mother said finally. We'll talk properly. I'm not. It's not serious, Mama. Nadia. Her mother's voice was not unkind, but it was certain. You don't show people your sketchbooks. Nadia opened her mouth, closed it. Come home for Christmas, her mother said again. Across the city, she didn't know yet, Shin Hyun-woo was sitting across from his own mother. A small, immovable woman named Shin Kyung-ja who had built the family network from nothing after Hyun-woo's father died, and who loved her son with the specific ferocity of a woman who had sacrificed everything to give him a world, and who had very clear ideas about what that world should contain. I hear you've been seen, his mother said, in Korean. Over tea he wasn't drinking. I'm frequently seen, he said. I run a visible business. With an African woman. She said it without venom, which was almost worse. With simple fact, the way you state a problem before solving it. A foreigner. A fellowship student. Hyun-woo. She set down her tea. You understand what I'm saying. I understand what you're saying, he said carefully. I'm choosing not to agree with it. His mother looked at him for a long moment. She had his eyes, or he had hers, that same quality of seeing completely and revealing selectively. This family has a position, she said. A reputation. Alliances that depend on perception. The perception of belonging, he said quietly. I know. He looked at the tea he wasn't drinking. I've built my life inside that perception, Yama. I know exactly what it costs. Then you know what I'm asking. He didn't answer, which was, his mother understood with the accuracy of a woman who had raised him, its own kind of answer. Outside Shin Kyung-ja's window, Seoul moved through its evening. Indifferent, enormous, full of its own collisions and costs. And somewhere in Mapo district, Nadia Mensah was closing her sketchbook and looking at the ceiling of her apartment and thinking about a man who had corrected her bracket angle and listened completely and said not all of it with the weariness of someone still deciding who to be. She was in trouble. So was he. Neither of them knew yet just how much. The first time Shin Kyung-ja saw Nadia in person, she said nothing. That was worse than anything she could have said. It happened accidentally, which Nadia would later decide was not an accident at all, because nothing in Kyung-ja's world happened accidentally. Hyun-woo had asked Nadia to meet him at the Shin Group's main office building in Gangnam, a glass and steel structure that wore its power quietly the way everything connected to him did. She arrived 7 minutes early. His mother arrived in the lobby at the same moment, flanked by 2 assistants, on her way out from a board meeting that had apparently run long. They saw each other across the marble lobby. Kyung-ja stopped, took in Nadia completely, the natural hair, the warm, deep ebony skin, the architectural sketchbook under her arm, the particular posture of a woman who had learned to walk into rooms that weren't built for her and stand straight anyway. Her expression moved through something too fast and too controlled for Nadia to name. Then it settled into a smooth, socialized blankness that was its own form of verdict. She nodded once, precisely, and walked out. Nadia stood in the lobby and felt the nod land in her chest like something small and very sharp. Hyun-woo appeared from the elevator 30 seconds later, took one look at her face, looked at the door his mother had just exited through. His jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. How long were you here before I came down? He said. Long enough, she said. He was quiet for a moment. I'm sorry. Don't apologize for her. I'm apologizing for the situation. That's the same thing. She looked at him steadily. Is this what it's going to be? He held her gaze. I don't know yet, he said, and she appreciated the honesty even as it cost her. because it meant the question was real, which meant the obstacle was real, which meant this thing between them. This careful, accumulating thing she'd been telling herself wasn't serious, was serious enough to have real obstacles. That was the moment she understood she was fully in it. They didn't talk about his mother again that evening. They walked along the Han River in the early November cold, shoulders occasionally close, conversation moving through architecture and cities, and the particular grief of watching old things disappear into new ones. He bought her roasted chestnuts from a street vendor and she ate them without grace, burning her fingers, and he watched her with that almost smile that she had catalogued without meaning to, noting every iteration and what preceded it. "Tell me about Accra," he said. Nobody in Seoul had asked her that. They asked about Africa generally, with the flattening vagueness that always made her tired. He asked about Accra specifically. She told him. The light in the morning, the specific chaos of the markets, the way her mother's house smelled like groundnut soup and old books, the way the city was in constant argument with itself about what to keep and what to build over, the same argument Seoul was having, the same argument every city that had survived colonialism and come out the other side with its identity bent but not broken was perpetually having. He listened the way he always listened. Completely. "You miss it," he said. "Every day," she said. "And I'm also exactly where I want to be." She looked at the river. "I used to think those two things canceled each other out. I don't think that anymore." "What changed?" She glanced at him. He was looking at the river, which gave her a moment to look at him without managing it. The sharp profile, the slight loosening around his eyes that happened when they'd been talking long enough for the controlled surface to settle into something more natural. He was, she had come to understand, a man of enormous discipline who found it genuinely restful to be around someone who didn't require the discipline to be performed. She was that person for him. She wasn't sure what he was for her yet. Something that felt increasingly like necessary. "I'll tell you when I figure it out," she said. He looked at her then. That half-second of full attention before he looked away. "Fair enough," he said. 3 days later, her mother called again. "I spoke to your Aunt Efua," her mother said. Efua, who lived in London, who knew everyone, who was constitutionally incapable of not researching things. She looked into the Shin family. Nadia closed her eyes. "Mama." "Organized crime, Nadia. Not alleged. Known. The construction business is real, but it is not the whole business, and you know that." "I know that. You know that, and you are still." "I know that, and I am still getting to know him, yes." She kept her voice even. "He is trying to make it something different. Slowly. That's real." "How do you know it's real?" "Because he told me it wasn't all legitimate and didn't try to convince me it was." She sat down. "Mama, people lie by making things sound better. He made it sound exactly as complicated as it is." Silence. "Nadia." Her mother's voice shifted. The professor gone, just her mother. "I am not worried about what he is. I am worried about what loving what he is will cost you. Your fellowship. Your reputation. If the wrong association. I know. Your father worked for 30 years to build a name that opened doors for you. I will not watch you." "Mama." Quietly. "I know." The silence stretched long enough to become its own conversation. "Come home for Christmas," her mother said finally. "I need to see your face when you talk about him." Across the city, simultaneously, in a way that would have felt cinematic if either of them had known it, Hyun-woo was sitting across from his older brother, Shin Hyun-jae, 40 years old, colder than Hyun-woo, more comfortable inside the network's darkness, less interested in its edges. "Yama told me," Hyun-jae said, in Korean, leaning back in his chair with the ease of a man who had already decided the outcome of this conversation. "Then you know what I'll say," Hyun-woo said. "I know what you think you'll say." Hyun-jae looked at him. They had the same jaw, the same eyes, different choices behind them. "You think this is about prejudice. Yama's generation. Her ideas about family and image and who belongs. Isn't it?" "Partly." Hyun-jae's voice was even. "It's also about the Daewha Alliance. You know Chairman Park's position on the network's public profile. An international relationship with a foreign national, a fellowship recipient. It draws exactly the kind of attention. I'm not managing my personal life around Chairman Park's comfort. You manage everything around the network stability. You always have. Hyun-jae looked at him steadily. This is not different. It is different. Why? Hyun-woo was quiet for a moment. In the years they'd been having versions of this conversation about the network, about duty, about the weight of the Shin name, he had always been able to produce a rational argument. He was good at rational arguments. He'd built a career on them. He didn't have one now. Because she corrects her own mistakes, he said finally, and doesn't pretend she didn't make them. Hyun-jae stared at him. That's your answer. It's the truest one I have. His brother shook his head slowly, not unkindly, with the specific sorrow of someone watching a person they love walk toward something they can see and the other person can't. Hyun-woo, if Iyama moves formally against this, she won't. If she does. Hyun-woo looked at his hands. The hands that had signed contracts and made calls and managed the machinery of a world he'd inherited and was slowly, stubbornly trying to redirect. Then I'll deal with that, he said quietly. When it happens. It happened sooner than he thought. For days later, Nadia received a phone call from an unknown number. A woman's voice, speaking in precise, lightly accented English. Calm, unhurried. The voice of someone who had never needed to raise it. Miss Mensah, Shin Kyung-ja said. I think it's time we spoke directly, without my son present. Nadia sat very still. I think so too, she said. They agreed on a place. A tea house in Insadong, neutral territory, the following afternoon. Nadia hung up and sat with the phone in her hand and felt the specific quality of the moment. Its weight, its formality, its implication that whatever was between her and Hyun-woo had become real enough to require management. She did not tell him about the call. She thought about telling him. She picked up her phone twice. Both times she set it back down. This was between her and his mother. She would not walk into it hiding behind him. Whatever Kyung-ja had to say, Nadia would hear it standing up, on her own feet, the way she'd walked into every room that hadn't been built for her. She picked up her sketchbook instead, drew the roofline of the tea house from memory, getting the angles exactly right. She was done missing bracket angles. The tea house in Insadong was the kind of place that had survived 40 years of Seoul changing around it by refusing to change itself. Low cedarwood tables, paper screens filtering winter light into something pale and considered. The smell of roasted barley tea and old timber. It was, Nadia thought as she entered, a very deliberate choice of location. Neutral in geography, entirely on Kyung-ja's cultural terms. She noted that, filed it, sat down. Shin Kyung-ja arrived exactly on time, which Nadia had expected, flanked by no one, which she hadn't. The older woman was smaller in person than she'd seemed in the lobby, fine-boned, immaculate in a charcoal wool coat, silver hair cut close, the posture of someone who had decided decades ago that the space she took up would be taken up with complete intention. She sat down across from Nadia and poured tea for both of them without asking, which was either a cultural courtesy or a power move or, Nadia suspected, both simultaneously. You're not what I expected, Kyung-ja said. In English, clear, precise, a woman who chose to conduct this conversation in Nadia's language and made sure Nadia knew it was a choice. What did you expect? Nadia said. Someone younger, less certain of herself. She studied Nadia over her tea. My son has a pattern of choosing people he can quietly manage. You are clearly not that. No, Nadia agreed. I'm not. Something shifted in Kyung-ja's expression. Not warmth, but a species of respect, reluctant and precise. Then I'll be direct, she said. I know you'll appreciate that more than ceremony. I will. My son is the head of a family that has spent 30 years building something in this city. Not just the business, the position, the relationships, the particular kind of trust that exists between certain families in Seoul that is older than law and more reliable than contracts. She set down her tea. That position depends on perception, continuity, the sense that the Shin family is of this place, rooted here, legible to the people we work with. And I'm not legible, Nadia said. You are extraordinarily legible, Kyung-ja said. That's the problem. You are legible as someone from elsewhere. Someone whose presence beside my son tells every family we work with that he has stepped outside the boundary of what they understand. She paused. In our world, Miss Mensah, the things people don't understand become the things they don't trust. And the things they don't trust become dangerous. Nadia was quiet for a moment. She had prepared for prejudice, had steeled herself for it on the walk over, had rehearsed the way she would hold herself in the face of it. This was more complicated than prejudice. This was prejudice wearing the clothing of pragmatism, which was harder to argue with and harder to dismiss. With respect, Nadia said, you're describing a system that requires your son to make himself smaller to remain legible to people who benefit from his work. That's not a tradition worth protecting. That's a constraint worth examining. Kyung-ja looked at her. You speak like someone who has never had to protect something fragile. I speak like someone whose father was told his architecture practice would never succeed in Accra because foreign firms were more legible to international clients. Nadia held the older woman's gaze. He built it anyway, slowly, on his own terms. Some things are worth the cost of being misunderstood. The paper screens filtered the winter light. Somewhere in the tea house, a low conversation murmured in Korean. You love my son, Kyung-ja said. Not a question. Nadia didn't look away. I'm not yet in a position to answer that with the honesty it deserves. But you're close. I'm close, Nadia said quietly. Kyung-ja poured more tea for both of them. Nadia watched her hands. Steady, deliberate. The hands of a woman who had poured tea in difficult rooms for 40 years and never spilled a drop. I'm not asking you to leave, Kyung-ja said finally. Nadia looked up. I'm asking you to understand what you're walking into. The older woman's voice shifted, still controlled, but something underneath it moved. My son has given his life to this family. Not because he was forced, because he chose it every year when he could have chosen differently. He carries that with a grace I don't think you fully see yet. She looked at Nadia steadily. If you stay, if this becomes what it appears to be becoming, there will be a cost. For him, for you, for what you are in this city. A pause. I need to know you understand that cost before you decide. Nadia sat with that. Let it be what it was. Not an attack. Not a dismissal, but a woman who loved her son in the ferocious particular way of someone who had built a world for him and was terrified of watching it unmade. I understand it, Nadia said. I haven't decided yet, but I understand it. Kyung-ja nodded. Once, the same precise nod as the lobby. But this one, Nadia felt, meant something different. They finished the tea. They parted on the street outside with a formality that was not warmth but was not hostility either. Something in between, something that had the shape of a beginning. Nadia walked back to Mapo District through the cold afternoon and called her mother. How was it? Her mother said immediately. She'd told her about the call that morning. Harder than I expected, Nadia said. And more honest. What did she say? Nadia recounted it. Carefully, accurately, without editorializing. Her mother listened without interrupting, which meant she was being careful, which meant it mattered. She loves him, her mother said when Nadia finished. Yes. So do you. Mama. Nadia. I am 61 years old and I know what my daughter sounds like when she's trying not to say a true thing. A pause. Do you love him? The street noise of Seoul moved around her. A bus. A street vendor. 2 students walking past speaking too fast for her to follow. Yes, she said quietly. I think I have for a while. Her mother was quiet for a long moment. Long enough that Nadia felt the distance between Mapo District and Accra as a physical thing. Then I need to meet him, her mother said. Mama, that's Christmas. You said you'd come home. Bring him. I can't just. Nadia. Firm. Final. The professor voice. If this man is going to be in your life, I will not know him through your descriptions. I will know him myself. A pause. Bring him. Let me see how he listens. Nadia almost laughed despite everything. That's your test? How he listens. It's the only test that matters, her mother said simply. She hadn't told Hyun-woo about the tea house meeting yet. She'd been carrying it for 6 hours, turning it over, deciding how much to reveal and in what order. She made the decision walking up the stairs to her apartment. Tell him everything, exactly as it happened, no editing. She called him before she'd taken her coat off. "I met your mother today," she said when he picked up. Silence. The particular silence of a man recalibrating very fast. "She called me," Nadia said, "4 days ago. I didn't tell you because I wanted to hear what she had to say without you managing either of us." She sat down on her bed. "I'm telling you now." "What did she say?" he said. His voice was quiet. She couldn't read its temperature. She told him. All of it. The tea, the pragmatism dressed as prejudice, the unexpected honesty, the moment that hadn't been an attack. He was quiet for a long time when she finished. "Hyun-woo, I'm here." A breath. I should have told her not to." "No." Firmly. "This was between her and me. She was right to want that. I was right to go." She paused. "She loves you very specifically. You should know that." Another silence. Softer than the ones before it. "My mother called you directly," he said quietly. "Had an honest conversation with you, and you're telling me to feel good about how much she loves me. I'm telling you it's complicated and real, and I'd rather have complicated and real than simple and performed." She looked at the ceiling. "My mother wants to meet you. Christmas. In Accra." The silence that followed was different from all the previous ones. Loaded in a new direction. "Your mother," he said slowly, "wants to meet me. She wants to see how you listen." A pause. "What does that mean?" "It means you'd better actually listen." He was quiet for a moment. Then, and she heard it clearly, the first time it had happened in a phone call, that almost smile finding its way into his voice. "When do we leave?" She felt something loosen in her chest. Something she hadn't known was held tight. "You don't have to." "Nadia." His voice was quiet and certain in equal measure. "When do we leave?" She closed her eyes. "December 22nd, she said. Outside her window Seoul glittered in the early dark, enormous and indifferent and full of its own contradictions. Inside her apartment something had shifted. The story between them had moved from possibility to decision, from careful to committed, from the question of whether to the harder, realer question of how. Neither of them knew yet what Accra would cost them. Neither of them knew that Hyun-woo's brother had made a call that afternoon, to Chairman Park, to the Daewha Alliance, to the specific people whose trust the Shin network depended on, and said 7 words that would reach Hyun-woo 3 days before Christmas. Choose the network or choose the woman. That was coming. But tonight, just tonight, there was a phone call and a man who said when do we leave without hesitation, and a woman who let herself believe for one unguarded moment that some things were worth every cost of being misunderstood. Accra in December smelled like possibility and red dust and something frying in groundnut oil 3 houses over, and Shin Hyun-woo stood in the arrivals hall of Kotoka International Airport looking at all of it with the careful attention of a man who understood that he was not a guest in a country but in a life. Specifically, in the life of a woman whose entire history lived in this air, this light, this noise. He had prepared. That was the first thing Nadia noticed when they landed, the way he'd prepared without making it a performance. He'd spent the 2 weeks before their flight asking her questions she hadn't expected. Not tourist questions. Real ones. What her mother found disrespectful in a first meeting. What her mother found patronizing in someone trying not to be disrespectful. What the right greeting was and whether it differed by time of day, and whether he should bring something and if so what, and what would read as genuine versus what would read as researched. "You're nervous," Nadia said on the plane, somewhere over the Middle East. "I'm prepared," he said. "There's a difference. You've been practicing the greeting for 4 days. Your mother is a retired literature professor who raised you," he said. "I would be an idiot not to practice the greeting." She looked at him in the dim cabin light. He was looking at the preparation notes on his phone. Actual notes, a document organized with the same precision he applied to everything, and something moved in her chest with a force she was done pretending wasn't love. Her mother's house was in Lab 1. A cream-colored 2-story with a garden that had been losing its argument with bougainvillea for 20 years and had gracefully accepted defeat. Nadia Mensah was waiting on the veranda when the car pulled up. 61 years old, natural silver locks, reading glasses pushed up on her head, wearing a Kent-trimmed house dress that managed to be both completely casual and entirely regal. She watched Hyun-woo get out of the car. He walked up to the veranda, stopped at the appropriate distance, and greeted her in Chui. Not perfectly. His tones were slightly off and Nadia could see him aware of it. But completely genuinely, the right words, the right posture, the right degree of respect without performance. Her mother blinked. Just once. Then her face did something Nadia hadn't seen it do in a long time. It opened. "Your tones need work," her mother said in English. "I know," Hyun-woo said. "I've only had 2 weeks." "Who taught you?" "A Ghanaian logistics contact in Seoul. He told me if I got it wrong you'd correct me, and that would be better than getting it right." Her mother looked at him for a long moment. "He was right," she said. "Come inside." Dinner was 3 hours long and Nadia spent most of it watching rather than participating. Watching her mother ask questions that sounded like conversation and functioned like excavation. Watching Hyun-woo answer with the particular honesty she'd come to recognize as his default register. The one that didn't sand the difficult edges down. He told her mother about the network without being asked directly. Not everything, but the shape of it, the inheritance of it, the slow, deliberate work of trying to redirect something built on foundations he hadn't chosen. Her mother listened. Completely. The way Nadia listened. The way Nadia realized she'd been drawn to him because he listened that way too. "My daughter says you're trying to make it something different," her mother said. "Slowly," Hyun-woo said. "Yes. Why slowly?" "Because fast changes in fragile systems create collapses. A collapse helps no one. Not the people depending on the legitimate business, not the people I'm trying to move away from the illegitimate one." He paused. "Slow is more honest about the difficulty." Her mother was quiet for a moment. "My husband said something similar once," she said. "About architecture. About restoration." She looked at Nadia briefly, a look that lasted 1 second and contained an entire conversation. Then back to Hyun-woo. "He would have found you interesting." It was the highest thing her mother could say about a person. Nadia felt tears threaten unexpectedly and blinked them back before either of them saw. The first 2 days in Accra moved with a warmth Nadia hadn't dared predict. Her mother and Hyun-woo developed an unlikely rhythm. He asked about her research. She corrected his Chui with increasing amusement. They argued about a Ghanaian novel he'd apparently read on the plane that she'd taught for 20 years and had strong opinions about. Nadia watched them from doorways and kitchen thresholds, holding the feeling carefully, not wanting to press on it too hard. On the 3rd day, everything changed. Hyun-woo's phone had been quiet since they landed. Deliberately. She knew. A choice he'd made. On the 3rd morning it rang with the specific ringtone she'd learned was his brother. He took it in the garden. She didn't follow. She gave him 20 minutes before she brought coffee out. And she knew from the set of his shoulders before she reached him that something had happened. He turned when he heard her. Took the coffee. Didn't drink it. "Tell me," she said. "Hyun-jae called Chairman Park," he said. His voice was even. The particular evenness of someone managing something enormous. "The Daewha Alliance has issued a formal position. If I continue this relationship publicly, they suspend cooperation with the Shin network." He paused. "That's 40% of our legitimate revenue pipeline. It would take years to replace." Nadia set down her own coffee carefully on the garden wall. "Your brother made that call," she said, "to protect the network. From his perspective, he was doing what needed to be done." He looked at her. "He's not wrong about the numbers. He went around you." "Yes." "To force your hand." "Yes." His jaw was tight. "It's a clean ultimatum, the kind that doesn't leave room for the slow approach." He looked at the garden, the bougainvillea, the morning light, the particular quality of Accra's December air that was nothing like Seoul and which he had spent 3 days absorbing with the attention of someone storing it carefully. "If I choose the network, I protect 40% of legitimate revenue, keep the Daewha Alliance, maintain the stability I've been building for 10 years. And if you choose me," Nadia said quietly. He looked at her. "Say it," she said. "All of it. If I choose you, the alliance fractures. The network loses the revenue. The legitimate transition I've been working toward gets set back by years. My mother loses the alliances she spent decades building." He held her gaze. And Hyun-jae takes operational control while I'm destabilized. Which means everything I've been slowly redirecting gets pulled back toward what it was. The garden was quiet. Somewhere over the wall, Accra was moving through its morning, motorcycle taxis, market vendors, the specific percussion of a city getting on with things. Hyun-woo, she said. I'm not going to ask you to make this easier, he said. It's not fair to ask you that. I wasn't going to make it easier. She looked at him steadily. I was going to tell you that if you choose the network, I understand it. Completely. Not because I don't. Not because this isn't. She stopped, steadied herself. Because I know what that network is to the people depending on it. I know what the slow transition means. I know you didn't build this for yourself. She paused. And I will not be the reason it collapses. He stared at her. You'd walk away, he said. To protect. I'd walk away to let you protect what you've given your life to, she said. Those aren't the same thing. He set down the coffee, crossed the small distance between them, stood close enough that she could feel the warmth of him in the morning air. He looked at her face with the specific, catalogued since Buckshin, complete, unmanaged, seeing her entirely. I've spent 10 years, he said quietly, making every decision based on what the network needed. What the family needed, what the alliance required. His voice was low. I have been very good at it, and I have been, quietly, without telling anyone, extraordinarily tired of it. She didn't speak. Let him finish. I'm not choosing the network, he said. I want to be clear about that before anything else. I'm not choosing it. He held her gaze. But I'm also not choosing you the way a man chooses something when he has nothing to lose. I'm choosing you with full knowledge of what it costs. I need you to know that, because I need you to know that I know what you are worth. The bougainvillea moved in the morning breeze. Nadia looked at this man, who had practiced a greeting for 4 days, who had read her mother's favorite novel on a plane, who had said not all of it with the weariness of someone still deciding, who listened completely, who was standing in her mother's garden choosing her out loud in the specific costly way that made it real. She closed the remaining distance between them. Not dramatically. Not with the urgency of a crisis survived. Quietly, the way significant things move from the inside. She put her hand against his jaw and he turned into it slightly, just slightly, the way someone turns toward warmth without deciding to. My mother is going to hear about this conversation, she said softly. I know, he said. She's been standing at the kitchen window for the last 4 minutes. Nadia almost laughed. You noticed. I notice everything about this house, he said. I've been paying attention. She believed him. She had believed him for a long time. Inside the kitchen, Nadia Mensah turned from the window and picked up her tea and said nothing to no one, which was her way of saying everything. She thought about her husband, about the architecture practice he'd built slowly against the current on his own terms. About the particular kind of man who chooses the difficult right thing not because it's easy but because he has fully accounted for the cost and decided it's worth it. She thought her daughter had found one of those. She thought it had taken long enough. Outside, in the garden full of bougainvillea that had won its long argument with order, Nadia Mensah and Shin Hyun-woo stood in the December Accra morning and didn't kiss. Not yet, not quite. But stood close enough that the decision was made, had been made, and both of them knew it. Back in Seoul, Hyun-jae's phone rang. He answered. Tell Chairman Park, Hyun-woo said, without greeting, his voice completely calm, that the Shin network will find alternative revenue streams. Tell him I appreciate the 30 years of alliance and wish him well. A pause. And tell him that if the Daewha position was designed to teach me what I value, it worked perfectly. He hung up. Nadia looked at him. You called your brother. Someone had to say it first, he said. It was always going to be me. Seoul in January was a different city from the one Nadia had arrived in 3 months ago. Or maybe she was a different person. She hadn't decided yet which was true, or whether the distinction mattered when the result was the same. She moved through the city now with the particular ease of someone who had stopped being a visitor without quite becoming a local, which was its own category, its own specific belonging that she was learning to inhabit without apology. She had 3 months left on her fellowship. Her sketchbooks were full. The Hanok restoration project had been submitted to her supervisor with a commendation she hadn't expected and had felt, for approximately 4 minutes, purely happy about before the complications of her actual life resumed their claim on her attention. The complications were considerable. Hyun-jae had not taken Hyun-woo's call from Accra quietly. The fallout from the Daewoo withdrawal had moved through the Shin network like weather, cold, structural, affecting everything. 3 subsidiary partnerships had paused pending review. 2 senior network associates had requested meetings with Hyun-jae directly, bypassing Hyun-woo, which was the organizational equivalent of a vote of no confidence delivered in the language of scheduling. Hyun-woo managed it with the same quiet efficiency he applied to everything. He restructured. He made calls. He found, in the 2 weeks since their return from Accra, 2 alternative revenue partnerships. Smaller than Daewoo, more legitimate, more aligned with the slow transition he'd been working toward. He didn't tell Nadia the details. He told her the shape of it, the way he always did, honest about the difficulty without requiring her to carry it. She carried it anyway. That was the thing about loving someone whose life had weight. The weight didn't stay on their side of the room. "You're not sleeping?" she told him on a Wednesday evening in his apartment. A high-floor space in Yongsan that was exactly what she'd expected, and somehow also not spare, precise, one wall entirely books. A kitchen that had clearly been used seriously for years, windows that looked out over the city with the particular view of someone who had chosen to see it fully rather than rise above it. "I'm sleeping," he said. He was making tea, his back to her, and she could see from the set of his shoulders that he was not sleeping. "Hyun-woo." He turned, looked at her, that full, unmanaged attention. "I'm sleeping less than usual," he said. "It's temporary. The restructuring. The partnerships. Hyun-jae." He brought the tea to the low table and sat across from her. "My brother is not wrong that I've destabilized something. He's wrong about whether it was worth it. Those are 2 different arguments, and we keep having them as if they're one." "Have you told him that?" "Several times." "Has it helped?" "No." He almost smiled. "He's very committed to being right." She looked at him across the tea. He looked tired in a way she hadn't seen before. Not defeated, nothing like defeated, but the specific tiredness of someone who had been strong for a long time and was in the part of the story where strength was still required and rest was not yet available. She wanted to fix it. She had learned, in the weeks since Accra, that wanting to fix things for him was a feeling she had to manage carefully. That he didn't need fixing, that what he needed was exactly what she was already doing, which was being present without requiring him to perform okayness he didn't feel. She reached across the table and covered his hand with hers. He looked down at her hand, then at her. Something in his face shifted, the controlled surface settling into something underneath it, quieter and more real. "My mother called this morning," he said. Nadia went still. "What did she say?" "She asked how the restructuring was going." He paused. "Then she asked how you were." Nadia blinked. "She asked about me. By name." He looked at her steadily. "She said, and I want to be accurate because I've been thinking about the exact words all day. She said, 'The girl is not what I expected. Tell her I said so.'" The tea steamed between them. "That's the closest she gets," he said quietly, "to saying she was wrong." Nadia sat with that. The specific weight of it. Shin Kyungja, who had built a network and a family and a position and a 40-year idea of what her son's life should contain, calling to ask about a woman from Accra by name, which was, in the language of women who never fully retract, the fullest retraction available. "Your mother is remarkable," Nadia said. "She is." He turned his hand under hers, just slightly, so their fingers aligned. "She would never say that to your face." "I know." She smiled. "I respect that about her." He looked at her for a moment. "You two are going to be, I don't have the right word. Formidable?" she offered. "I was going to say exhausting," he said. "But yes, formidable." She laughed. It came out real and unguarded, and he watched it happen with an expression she had no category for. Something beyond the almost smile. Something that had crossed over into its full version, rare and quiet and completely genuine. She stored it. She had been storing things for months without meaning to, building an archive of him. The listening, the notes on his phone, the Chui greeting with the wrong tones, the call from her mother's garden, the hand on the table. And she understood now that she was not storing them against loss but against time, the way you store things you intend to return to for years. 2 weeks later, her supervisor extended the fellowship. 6 months. An additional project, the documentation of colonial-era modifications to traditional architecture across 3 Seoul districts, a project that required a research partner fluent in both the historical record and the city's current development landscape. Hyun-woo, when she told him, looked at her for a long moment. "You need a research partner," he said. "Apparently. Someone who knows the development landscape. Intimately, ideally. And the historical record. You did correctly identify a bracket angle from a moving vehicle," she said. "I feel that's relevant experience." He was quiet for a moment, the particular quiet of a man letting something land fully before he responded to it. "You're staying," he said. "For 6 more months, yes. And after 6 months." She looked at him steadily. "I don't know yet," she said honestly. "My practice is in Accra. My mother is in Accra. Everything I built before Seoul is in Accra." She paused. "And everything I've built since I got here it's here." She held his gaze. "I don't know how to reconcile that yet. But I know I want the time to try." He nodded slowly. Not disappointed. She watched for disappointment and didn't find it. What she found instead was the same quality she'd seen in him since the beginning. A willingness to hold difficult things without requiring them to be resolved prematurely. "Then we have 6 months," he said. "To try. And we're honest about what we don't know." "We're always honest," he said. "That was established at a coffee shop in Anggukdong approximately 4 months ago." She smiled. "You remember the exact location." "I remember everything about that morning," he said simply. Without drama. Just truth, stated at its full value without inflation. She believed him. She had believed him for a long time. On a Saturday in late January they walked the first of the documentation districts together, Bukshin, which was where it had started, which felt right in the way that returns to beginning places feel right when you've become someone different since you left. He carried her equipment without being asked. He pointed out a restoration detail she'd missed on a gate pillar, delivered with the same matter-of-fact precision as the bracket angle 4 months ago, and she said, "You were right immediately this time, without the 3-day delay," and he said, "I know," with the full smile, and she stopped walking and looked at him in the winter morning light. "What?" he said. "Nothing," she said. "Keep walking." He kept walking. She fell back into step beside him, shoulder occasionally close to his, sketchbook open, the city moving around them with its ordinary indifferent life, and something between them that was no longer careful, no longer accumulating, no longer held at the precise distance of people managing what they felt. Something settled, present and chosen and real. That evening she called her mother. "How is Seoul?" her mother said. "Cold," Nadia said. "Beautiful. Complicated. And the man." "Also all 3. Her mother made a sound that was not quite a laugh but was adjacent to it. "Your father would have liked him," she said. "Not the first time. But this time without the past tense carrying weight. This time it sounded like a welcome." "I know," Nadia said softly. "Bring him back in the summer," her mother said. "The garden is better in the summer. The bougainvillea has won its argument with order, I know." "It has," her mother said. "Some things are better for it." Nadia looked out the window of her Mapo apartment at the Seoul night. The lights, the density, the city that had become, in 4 months, something she moved through as if it partially belonged to her or she partially to it. She thought about Accra in the summer, about her mother's garden, about a man who was 3 districts away in a Yongsan apartment working late, who would answer if she called, who listened completely, who had stood in December morning light and chosen out loud. She thought about what her mother had said at the beginning. "Come home for Christmas. Let me see your face when you talk about him." She thought about what her face must have looked like. "Mama," she said. "Yes. You knew. From the first phone call. You already knew." A pause. Then, with the specific warmth of a woman who had waited patiently for her daughter to catch up, "I know what you sound like when you're trying not to say a true thing, my love. I've known since you were 7 years old." Nadia smiled. Let the city hold her. Let the feeling be its full size without managing it down. Some things were worth the cost of being misunderstood. Some people were worth the cost of every difficult room, every sharp nod in a marble lobby, every ultimatum delivered from the wrong side of loyalty, every bracket angle corrected from a moving vehicle, every cup of tea in a cedarwood room where two women told each other the truth. Some choices made themselves slowly, across coffee and chestnuts and chui greetings with the wrong tones and gardens that had stopped fighting what they'd become. She had made hers. So had he. The city glittered. Her sketchbook was full. 6 months stretched ahead like a room she hadn't drawn yet. Full of angles she would get exactly right, and a few she'd deliberately leave open. Some spaces were better unfinished. Some stories were better still being written. The end.